We all know Pixar was once the gold standard in animation, but now their latest original movie, Elio, just delivered the studio's worst ever opening. While at the same time, Sony quietly dropped an animated movie about K-pop idols fighting demons, and it went completely viral. This isn't a fluke either. It's a sign of what audiences want from animation, how one studio is innovating and keeping things fresh, and another is slowly getting left behind. So how did Sony completely outplay Pixar, and why could this cement Sony as the best animation studio of this era? Well, it all starts with a creative disaster behind the scenes at Pixar that no one seems to be talking about, but we'll touch on that soon. It's no secret that Pixar has been in a massive slump, but the extent of the slump surprised even me when I started looking into it. Since 2020, Pixar has released 6 original animated movies. They've actually really been pushing original animation in the past 5 years. But here's the problem. Every single one of them has flopped, with the exception of Elemental, which barely turned things around, and Inside Out 2, which is a sequel. Now, don't get me wrong, I personally loved some of these movies. Soul and Luca are genuinely beautiful, but as much as I enjoyed them, I have to be honest, they just haven't stuck with people the same way other animated movies have. When I watched them, I thought, damn, that was pretty nice. And then I haven't thought of them since. Meanwhile, Sony, a studio that used to be seen as chaotic and inconsistent, has been totally rewriting its reputation. Yes, they gave us the Emoji Movie, which I know some of you loved, but since 2018, they've given us 4 bangers. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, Mitchells vs. the Machines, and now K-pop Demon Hunters. Each of these movies feels distinct, artistically bold, confident in its tone and identity, and they truly last in people's minds. People talk about them, quote them, people become so passionate about these movies, not just for the stories, but also because of the innovative, insane visuals. So do you guys see what's happening now? They've completely swapped roles. Where Pixar was thriving in the 2000s with original, unforgettable storytelling, now their originals are struggling to leave an impression, while Sony's are hitting harder than ever. This hasn't been luck, it's been strategic. Sony's one of the few studios that seems to understand how modern audiences engage with animation. They don't force everything into theaters, they use streaming when it makes sense, and most importantly, they don't shy away from weird, high-concept, internet-friendly ideas. They lean into them. They actually let their creatives tell the stories that they want to tell with minimal executive oversight and control. So when you see Pixar quietly release Elio, a heartfelt, imaginative movie that barely got a reaction, and then see Sony drop a wild K-pop Demon Slayer movie that dominates Twitter, Spotify, and Netflix's global top 10, it's a reflection of 2 very different studios moving in very different directions. So let's talk about the most recent example of that divide. Pixar's latest original movie had heart, cute animation, and was a family-friendly story. It's not that the movie's actually bad at all, but what most people don't know is that there was a disaster behind the scenes that led to this box office nightmare. See, the Elio we're all seeing on screen tells the story of an awkward, lonely kid who accidentally becomes Earth's ambassador to a galactic council of aliens and makes friends with a bunch of them. It's cute, heartfelt, and at times pretty emotional, I'm not gonna lie. But here's the thing, this wasn't the story that was originally supposed to hit cinemas. And that's why the first trailer and the last trailer looks so different story-wise. Behind the scenes, Elio went through a creative overhaul that stripped away most of what made it unique. The original version, led by Coco's co-director Adrian Molina, was supposed to be a deeply personal film based on Adrian's upbringing. It was supposed to include queer-coded themes and a central character inspired by Molina's own identity as a gay Mexican-American outsider. It was legitimately a passion project for him. But in 2023, following early test screenings where audiences said they really enjoyed the movie but wouldn't pay to see it in cinemas, Pixar executives demanded major changes. According to multiple insiders, the film's queer themes and cultural specificity were completely removed. Molina ended up stepping away from the project after being hurt by the feedback and disappointed with all the changes. And that resonated throughout the studio too, as a lot of people supposedly left the project because of how unhappy they they were that Pixar completely destroyed this beautiful movie. Voice actors were also recast, and directors Dami Shi and Madeline Sharafian were brought in to reshape the tone and direction of the movie. What had started as a bold, intimate story became something much safer and way more familiar. Elio's original story apparently had so much more personality, heart, and beauty, but Pixar didn't want that version. They refused to let the director tell his story. And the thing is, this isn't the first time Pixar has had an issue with queer representation in their movies. In 2022, Pixar employees wrote a letter claiming Disney reportedly cut nearly every moment of overtly gay affection from their films. So Pixar execs have taken matters into their own hands and started removing these themes themselves before Disney gets the chance to. And that says a lot about where Pixar is right now. This is a studio that once built its name on taking risks. We got a post-apocalyptic romance between two robots with barely any dialogue, a rat that becomes a chef, an abstract journey through a child's emotions. These are kind of risky ideas. Now though, they seem afraid to make anyone even slightly uncomfortable or to stand by bold, creative visions when they feel even slightly risky. They'd rather delay a movie by a year and spend way more money just to sterilize it completely. And this isn't Disney's fault. Disney was the parent company when Pixar released all those risky ideas. The problem is, Pixar seems to have lost its backbone and conviction. They're being neutered creatively from the inside. And this is just one of the many problems for the movie. I know there's been a lot of talk online about the animation style and fatigue with this style specifically, but I genuinely don't think that's an issue. If a story is great, boring animation won't hold it back. The problem is the story is far too familiar, sterile, and follows the same emotional beats as most Pixar movies. It sometimes feels as if they're forcing you to feel something in key moments. Apart from that, despite being a big budget original, Elio was given a surprisingly soft marketing push. There were trailers and posters, yes, of course, but no real buzz at all. Although it's impossible to find the marketing budget, a lot of people had no idea it was even in cinemas. That just goes to show the marketing was frail at best. Compare that to Lilo and Stitch, which was literally all over everything at all times. Pixar clearly decided Elio would do poorly and just wanted to cut its losses. And then came the icing on the cake. The release timing. Elio was released during one of the most competitive weekends of the year, especially for family-friendly movies. It had to compete directly with How to Train Your Dragon and the Lilo and Stitch remake, both massive box office hits. Elio was buried from day one, basically. The result? Elio had legitimately the worst opening in Pixar's history. And even though it got really strong reviews, that simply didn't matter. Very few people were enticed to go watch it because the animation looked the same, the story didn't seem as special, and it's in cinemas with other great family movies. So as a parent, why would you spend your money on Elio instead of Lilo and Stitch, which you know for sure your kids will like? At the end of the day, Elio was a disaster because of what happened behind the screen. Pixar has become a studio that avoids any risk like the plague, rather than letting their creatives tell the stories they want to tell. Which brings me nicely to the studio that does exactly that. Sony Animation. See, Sony released a movie that, unlike Elio, has completely taken social media by storm. K-pop Demon Hunters is the kind of movie that, on paper, should have been a mess. A group of K-pop idols who moonlight as demon slayers? You cannot tell me that doesn't sound like a weird-ass concept. And yet, it became one of the most successful animated releases of the year. Not in spite of its nicheness, but because of it. And even though it was originally meant to be in theaters, Sony premiered it directly on Netflix, which is definitely a crime, but it worked because within 48 hours, it was #1 on Netflix's global top 10, and by the end of the week, it had reached the top spot in 33 countries and was the top 10 in every other country. It's gotten more than 60 million views in 3 weeks, which puts it on track to have one of the best first month viewership of any Netflix original movie ever. They're mind-blowing numbers, but honestly, the real explosion happened with the music. Like any great animated musical, K-pop Demon Hunters did not treat music as an afterthought. It was the core of the experience. Sony partnered with real K-pop heavyweights, including Teddy Park and Grammy-nominated producers who've worked with BTS, Blackpink, and Twice to create 2 fictional idol groups, Huntrix and and their rivals, the Saja Boys. The team really poured everything into making these songs genuinely catchy, fun, story-driven, and lyrically creative. And it paid off. Since the movie's release, the soundtrack has skyrocketed. Hendrix's lead single, Golden, is currently sitting at number 1 on the US Spotify chart and number 2 globally, beating Blackpink's all-time record. Meanwhile, the Saja Boys' Your Idol hit number 2, beating BTS to become the highest charting male K-pop group in US Spotify history. And I'm also personally obsessed with Your Idol, so, not surprising. The full soundtrack has risen to number 3 on the Billboard 200, making it the highest charting soundtrack of 2025, and the highest charting animated soundtrack since Encanto in 2022. And that doesn't even mention the online craze for these songs. From TikTok to YouTube to Instagram, everybody's listening, reacting, and talking about the soundtrack. This was legitimately a strategic masterstroke. But it wasn't just the music. K-pop Demon Hunters had a clear visual identity from the start. Directors Maggie Kan and Chris Applehands described the film as a love letter to Korean pop culture, pulling influence from anime, concert photography, idol choreography, and Korean folklore. And the result is something that feels colorful, dynamic, expressive, and super unique. It doesn't just look like another Sony animated movie. It has its own flair and personality. I really loved the style. The action's fluid, the colors are gorgeous, and the character animation, especially the girls' expressions, is so fun. All of that is exactly why it worked. The movie's specificity is its superpower. It doesn't try to appeal to everyone. It just commits fully to its tone and its audience. It's loud, unapologetic, and it embraces its weirdness without ever losing the emotional core. Because of that, K-pop Demon Hunters now holds the highest combined Rotten Tomatoes score of any animated movie released this year. Critics have praised how it tackles themes like identity, celebrity, and friendship without ever feeling preachy or sanitized. It's genuinely a beautiful story, although too fast-paced at times. There's been a lot of chatter online that the movie may have been around 3 hours originally, and that Netflix wanted Sony to cut it way down. If that were true, the pacing issues would make sense, but I haven't been able to find an official source confirming that, so who knows. Also, spoilers. I could not believe Jinwoo died. That was such a ballsy move. I mean, I love that the movie had twists and turns that no one really expected. It's not a cookie cutter basic movie at all. In my opinion, this is literally the best animated musical we've gotten in ages. Probably the best since Coco, Moana, or Frozen, and honestly, none of those movies have had me dancing and singing the songs like this one has. I'm seriously hoping this pushes Sony to make more animated musicals because it's one of my favorite subgenres. And honestly, the decision to release it on Netflix might have been kind of genius. By choosing Netflix, they gave the movie space to breathe and let it find its people organically while also keeping costs lower. The result was insane viral traction, massive streaming numbers, and a wave of so many fan art, memes, cosplay, and TikTok edits that put the movie everywhere. I still think it could have done well in theaters, but maybe not this well. I think the concept was a little too weird for a large part of the audience to spend their money on that specific cinema ticket. On Netflix, it was a perfect fit. So while Pixar was busy softening Elio into something safer and quieter, Sony went the complete opposite direction. They took a ridiculous idea, executed it with confidence. This begs the question though, is the future of original animation going to be on streaming platforms? Honestly, maybe. Theatrical animation isn't going anywhere. I'm not saying that. Inside Out 2 just proved that. But what K-pop Demon Hunters shows is that streaming might be the new home for bold, original ideas. Not everything has to be a monumental theatrical release. Sometimes the weirdest, most specific, most creative stories actually thrive more when audiences can take a chance on them without having to spend money on cinema tickets, especially in this economy. It just makes sense. Sony's known that for a while. Mitchell's vs. the Machines was another successful example, a totally original, offbeat movie that exploded on Netflix. Once a studio knows a concept works, then it can bring it to theaters. Like with K-pop Demon Hunters, now that audiences have fallen in love with it, a sequel in cinemas would make way more sense. You can go bigger, deeper, and turn it into a whole big cinematic event. So that's the real divide between Sony and Pixar right now. And honestly, most other studios too. Sony's looking forward. They're continuing to experiment, take swings. Not every project is gonna work, but when it does, it really works. I'm personally hoping Gato is a move in the right direction for Pixar, because right now Sony's on a roll, and K-pop Demon Hunters just cemented their place at the top of the animation Mount Rushmore. Animation is supposed to be bold, weird, personal. Pixar used to know that, but it seems like along the way they've completely lost their way, while Sony has seemingly found it. And that's the difference.